Okay, here we go. Welcome, Amy. So glad to have you on the channel. This is our first conversation together publicly. We did meet on Zoom once through the activation sessions. Thank you for putting yourself out there. It's been so cool to get to meet the people who are around the channel and get a better idea of like, what are you doing? What are you about? And you were one of the ones that really stands out in my memory of like, I still think about our discussion regularly. But I would love to start with like, what drew you into the owning authenticity community to begin with? How did you find your way here?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's exciting to be having this chat with you.
Yeah.
There were a few things that drew me into this space. So specifically, I was going through my North Node return and I was trying to find information about other people's experiences of that. I'm pretty familiar with astrology, but I really like to dig into like the experience that other people are having or that what people are saying about these themes, and you were one of the few people I found that was talking about North Node returns in like a really depthful way that I felt like I could resonate with on a deeper level. So that definitely drew me in, but also, I mean, the title itself, owning authenticity, walking a pathway of authenticity, is something that has just been so important and critical in my life experience. So it was like both the depth of content related to the Aries North Node, but also just like your depth of explorations of these themes of authenticity and how to really be ourselves and walk boldly into different spaces, being who we truly are.
Yeah. What has been your experience in your life and, as an Aries North Node, Libra South Node, what is your experience around authenticity? Is that something that has always been a value for you, or is that something that came about at some point?
It's a major theme in my life. So especially where the nodes are situated in my chart, the North Node is at the top of my chart and the South Node is at the bottom of my
Oh,
chart.
okay.
My childhood theme, my upbringing experience had a lot of the South Node leanings. Definitely very much a people pleaser. I very much became who I was socially conditioned to be through my upbringing. And I totally lost myself in that for most of my life. And it was a really painful experience to realize through, internal strife and the external reality not reflecting what I needed it to be. It was a process of realizing that something wasn't aligned, that something about the way that I was living wasn't working. And that's what really like took me into my spiritual awakening, because I had to really reconfigure what was going wrong. It wasn't just one thing that was happening in my life. It was like the way that I was showing up. It was the way that I was motivating myself to make choices and make decisions and even choose like
Mm,
career path. Where did I want to live? I slowly had to realize that all of those choices were actually other people were choosing that for me.
mm,
It was all conditioned onto me, and none of it was actually reflective of what I really wanted or needed.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, so maybe I'll pause there, but it has been a big winding journey of especially coming to terms with that South Node part and realizing that's not where I meant to live.
What age would you say you hit that like icy patch of like, this is not going well. Like, this is getting dangerous. Like, I need to make a change. I need to hit a turning point here. Like, about what age would you say that happened for you?
That's a good question. It was my late 20s, and I'm guessing it was around my Saturn return.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
When things
what
started
did your
not.
work change as a result of this, like becoming more authentic?
Yeah, so I'm a social worker by education. That was the full-time career path that I had been in for many, many years up until that point. And I love a lot of things about that work, but there were aspects of, I mean, there are aspects of how authenticity is stifled in a number of different spaces. And there were aspects of authenticity being stifled in my experience of working for organizations, working for bosses, having to show up in this like professional cookie cutter, you're allowed to be one thing sort of a way.
Yeah. As soon as they say business casual, I start like breaking out in hives. I'm like, my hoodie? No. Jeans? Really? Slippers? Not really? Okay. I don't fit here. No. Um, gosh, yeah, I'll bet. I'll bet the Saturn return played a part. It's like all of these different elements of our energy that are waiting there to try to like kick us into like, who were you born to be? And especially with that Aries North Node, Libra South Node, like being your authentic self is kind of that's the gist of it. That's what you came here to do is like break apart from what the people around you are expecting of you, which talk a little bit about like how deep those hooks or whatever you want to call it, those roots or whatever it is, like how deep does that run?
Yeah. I mean, it was everything. I made some drastic life choices as a result of some of these inner awakenings and experiences. And, I mean, it took a couple years before I was ready to like externally actualize some of those internal processes that were happening for me. Um, but I really feel like I like burned my old life to the ground and had to do like the whole Phoenix journey of like coming out of the ashes. Like I left my hometown, I quit my job, I received
Mm.
this vision and a spiritual calling to travel indefinitely and without a plan, which is not at all how I've ever operated. I feel like spirit really challenged me to let everything go. So my
Yeah.
physical appearance, I changed, my relationships were completely different, and I just kind of set out on the road in pursuit of like new horizons. I had never lived anywhere else other than my hometown in Nebraska. And so it was like an entirely new experience and exploration. And it was amazing and like so hard because it was unlearning. It was unlearning
Yes.
everything that I'd ever been taught. And like that can be really painful
Oh,
and isolating too.
yeah. For a time,
Yeah.
right? Like there's almost like you got to go through the part where you let go of what's not right for you. And in the middle, there's like you're there by yourself. And then eventually, on the other side of that, at least in my experience, is that people gravitate to you that match like your new version. Was your experience similar to that?
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. As you were saying that, I am recalling how for such a long period of time, I felt like when a snake peels off of its skin,
Uh-huh.
like the dead skin, like hanging on to the snake in a way. And it was just this like long process of letting that go. But, the further that I continued to just like keep going and keep following the path and keep moving in the directions that my heart and my soul were calling me to move in and like not using this part of my body quite so much. Um, and I had to make some tough choices of there were some things that I was still trying to cling on to a relationship that wasn't fully aligned with this new direction I was going. And so, that took me through some tough Saturn lessons as well.
Mm.
But as soon as I let go of that, it was like magical things started to happen in my life. I had this opportunity to be a land steward at a queer land project out in Northern California for a year. I found all these kinds of amazing little pockets of community, and that has just continued. It's been, I'd say, like the last 2 to 3 years that I've been mostly outside of the losing of the skin experience and kind of on the other side of being able to receive the benefits and blessings of those choices. And it's been continuous. It's been continuous. Even coming back, I moved back to the Midwest and I'm still like finding little shiny pockets of different community spaces here that I had never found any of this when I was living in Nebraska in those old ways of being. But
Mm.
it's everywhere. Once we follow that like internal pulling and like really trust that, it's just like it really is like magic. It just starts happening.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I feel like a lot of people get stuck in the place of like, give it to me and then I'll let go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that shit don't work.
No.
It don't work at all. You'll stay there with what you're clinging to indefinitely. Like you truly do have to surrender to what you know is right. And especially with Aries North Node, if that takes you into the solitude of like it's just you and you, like just know it's not going to be forever. But to
Yeah.
find your soul tribe, like you really do have to let go of the relationships that aren't aligned, that are kind of more just there as like comfort, like safety blanket kind of things. And I'll bet, I mean, I can relate to it, what you're saying. And like I'm not even an Aries North node, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
I think that's so true with a lot of life changes though. Like it physically, viscerally felt like I was being asked to jump off of a cliff without being able to look over the edge and see what was down there. And that
yes.
was the repeated experience. And I do think there's like it's like a trust fall with the universe. I do think there's like a relationship building that happens with the universe and with,
Yeah.
energy when we make those kinds of choices when we can.
Yeah. Like one of the pieces of Aries North Node is like, you know, typically early on, you're very cut off from your instincts. Like there's more like a cerebral, like what you're saying, like decision making, pros and cons, let me reason it out and trust the logic and whatever. And Aries is all instinctual. There's not even a decision to make. There's just like fire in your belly that says, like, nope, this is the only way. There's not even another choice. But early on, like you're not really connected to that. And so, in my experience, it is very much like you said, like building the relationship that your intuition is not actually trying to kill you, right? Like it's only telling you to jump off the cliff because it knows that there's a big pillow down there or whatever it is that's absolutely going to break your fall.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm a social worker, I'm a systems thinker. So this is just making me think about the bigger issue of living in a culture that's so heavily focused on the mind and like mental processes of decision making, because that was really how I was trained and conditioned, was to think everything through and like make the list of pros and cons and like really, really, really use my brain to decide things. But it's a very narrow, limited way of using our intelligence as humans when we cut ourselves off at the neck and like only focus on decision making from up here. And we lose, there's like a depth of decision making that comes from the body and from tuning into our feelings, tuning into our energy, turning into our heart, our spirit, whatever. There's a level of depth and wisdom that comes from this energy center as opposed to this one.
Yeah.
And I feel like a huge reason why so many of us stay trapped in situations that we don't enjoy, that aren't in our best interest in this culture and this society, is because we're all trained to use our brains and we're all trained to be disconnected from the body. And that's by design, to keep us stuck and to keep us powerless.
Right. Those people are easy to manipulate because all you got to do is be like, where's your proof? And then they fall apart, they cave, they're like, you're right, I don't have any proof. And it's like, your gut is telling you, your gut is screaming at you that, like, you have to do this, you can't do that, like, whatever it is, it's guiding you. But I wonder, like, I can almost feel the people watching asking, like, wait, so how do you do that? How do
Mm.
you come down out of mind and sink into body? Like, what are the practical steps of like, how do you actually even begin to hear? For those who may not be as far along in the journey, like, do you remember or what would you advise as far as like some things that we can try?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I love
Oh,
that
yay.
question because it took me so long to figure it out, because there's just, yeah, yeah. Um, and I do think we're at a time, because this is something I have my pulse on. I see us in the midst of like a massive mental health revolution. I see us in the midst of like self-care revolution, authenticity revolution.
Yes.
Like I do think we're at a time where there's a lot more information. There's so much information out there about what it means to develop a mind-body connection. So like that might be my first like basic suggestion for people, is like Google mind-body connection. And there's like so
Yeah.
many different practices that people use. Um, for me personally, I remember very well the things that I've used, because there's still strategies that I continue to use because I was in my head for all of my entire life. I had no connection to my body. Before I started this journey, I could not tell you the difference between my thoughts and my feelings. That's
Yeah.
how in my head I was. Like there was no, yeah, like there was
I
no
I thought I
awareness.
had no feelings.
Oh,
I
yeah,
thought I literally was a robot.
yeah,
Like that
yeah.
there was nothing going on in there. And it's like that's just how numbed out I was. Like,
Right,
and so
right.
I mean, if that's where you are, if that's like what you think is like, I don't even have intuition. It's like it's just the volume knob is at zero.
Yes,
So
yes.
like how do you start to turn it up? Like, and I think even just having the intention of like, yeah, I think I would like to hear what my body has to say. I think I do want to know, like, what are my feelings, like even just being open to receiving that from yourself. Like, I mean, if that door is like sealed shut,
Right.
no steps, no tips and tricks are going to help you to open it. Like if you don't want it to open. And that's where I think like everybody's doorway to what's in there gets opened like in their own divine timing, because that's where we repress the things that are too painful to deal with, you know?
It's
So,
true.
yeah,
It's true. When I connected to my body, there were pieces of information there that I hadn't been aware of that,
yeah,
it does open up because the body is where we store trauma. We don't
right.
carry that in our brains, like our brains react to that, but our body is where we store trauma. So any suppressed traumas we have when we start engaging with the body, it is going to come back up.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I kind of like took myself through, I don't know if I would call it boot camp because that seems like a little bit more extreme, but I really needed like a structured mechanism of knowing how to connect because I was so intellectualized and I was like in all these academic spaces and I was like teaching full time at the time and going to PhD school. And so I needed something that could meet me here, even though I knew that I needed to connect down here. So I went through, it's called mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's like a educational course. It was like a 6 to 8 week program that teaches you the basics of mindful yoga poses, mindful other practice like mindful eating, mindful walking, meditation. It helped me build some of those initial muscles because that's the other part of it is like getting in touch with our body is like building a muscle. So if we've never been to the gym before and we've like never lifted a weight before, the first time we do it, we might not feel anything. It might be way too hard. It's not going to feel good. We're not going to feel connected to it. It's going to feel awkward. And it's the same thing when we're trying to get into the body. It has to be more than just like a one and done thing. It's like, again, it's like a relationship that we're building. And so by having that kind of a structure that I gave myself, I was like dedicating that I was going to be practicing mindful yoga. I was going to be practicing meditation.
Yeah.
And those have been the two most important staples for me. I I have an issue with like I feel like yoga has turned into like a workout process for a lot of people, or like people want their bodies
Mm,
to look a certain way through yoga. And yeah, you can use yoga that way. But yoga is a healing tool. It's been used in many cultures for thousands and thousands of years as a method of healing physical and mental illness. And so
yeah.
when we do it mindfully and slowly, it's also a way to really get to know our body and to feel, I feel like for me, it allowed me to like focus on and come into parts of my body that I never had, you know, concentrated on before. Um, Meditation is really helpful for that too. There's body scan meditations that were really helpful for me. So for example, like tuning into your big toe or tuning into your baby toe of each foot specifically and getting into the feel of like what does that feel like and can you connect with that part of your body? It's kind of like awakening. I feel like I had to do that initial baseline level connection to my body to just like awaken some of those basic capacities again.
Yeah. And even, I mean, the basics, like what you're describing, like those are still big steps, you
Yeah.
know? So, like, if someone is feeling like, okay, that's still too much for me, like, please know that I am right there with you. Like, meditation for me was so hard. Like, sitting there in the silence, I felt like I would have like just flashes of horrific memories or like visions of the future, like my worst nightmare kind of thing playing out on the back of my eyelids. Like there's like when you turn inward, I mean, the stored, like what you're talking about, like the stored traumas, the stored fears that we haven't allowed ourselves to face, like all of that stuff is kind of waiting there. And so not to discourage, because I mean, really, like this is the pathway, like you got to go down to come through kind of thing. Um, but please know that if you try to tune in to your body and it feels like you're re-traumatizing yourself, there's spaces out there to like support you and hold you in doing that process, or like giving you a structure like what Amy's describing, so that you're not doing it on your own and just like bringing up a whole like opening Pandora's box and then like you don't know what to do with it. Um, like I think about when I first started meditating, I sat there and cried for like 6 weeks, like just straight, like all freaking day. And it wasn't even all of it. It was just the beginning wave of like, all the emotions that I had pushed down and refused to let myself have because of my programming, because of my conditioning. So, all of that to say that if it feels really hard to tune in to your body and to do some of these things, like, please don't ever feel like you're broken or you're defective or there's no hope for you. Because I think it is like what Amy's describing, like, if you go into the gym and you've never lifted weights and you've got a 100-pound dumbbell and you can't even budge it off the floor, it's like, see, I'm broken. No, get yourself a 5-pound weight
Yeah.
and like go to town, man. Oh, yeah, look at this. I can do it. Like, it's all about like meeting yourself where you are. And so, like anything else, like, I think it's important to remember that self-love is the foundation of like, it's not about being able to strike the perfect pose or like do a perfect 20-minute meditation. It's about being able to accept yourself. And if that means you can do a 10-second meditation, great. Like that's 10 seconds more than you were doing yesterday. And so like meet yourself at whatever stage you are and wherever however much space you have to give to yourself. Like got to grow it up as you can. It can be
Yeah.
kind of overwhelming or a lot
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah, I think those are really great points, and I'm glad that you're bringing this perspective because I do see a lot of people who are resistant to meditation specifically, and I get that because it was hard for me to sit in silence.
Same.
It was only because I was in that container doing it with somebody who was leading us, with a bunch of other people who were also doing it too. Like that's
Yeah.
what made it easier for me to be able to learn those skills. So I think that's like a really important point of this conversation. Like if you feel like you can't sit in silent meditation, it doesn't mean that you can't practice mindfulness. It doesn't mean that you can't develop a relationship with your body. And sitting in silence is like one form of meditation. My my favorite form of meditation right now is I just take a quiet walk barefoot around the park that's outside of my house. And like that's, I'm not sitting in silence. I do use that sometimes, but there's walking meditation. There's different forms of I think guided meditations are a great way to go if someone is less comfortable with like the sitting in silence, because then you have someone's kind voice to help you. And there's so many guided meditations that are designed to just help you mentally focus, because that's the thing with silent meditation. If we have always stayed busy, if we've been chronically busy throughout our life, sitting in silence is like loud and your brain goes off in all these different directions and you can't even focus and you get frustrated, and so people can just give up from that experience too.
Yeah.
But so many guided meditations with like people who will help you, okay, like now gently bring your focus back to your body. They'll walk you through how to focus on your breath. So it's not just you sitting in silence. And I think that can feel less intimidating.
Yes. Totally. Totally. You got to find the baby step that's like where you are,
Yeah.
like the ladder analogy. It's like if the bottom rung of the ladder is 10 feet tall and you can't reach it, it's like, see, I can't do it. It's like, well, I
Not the one.
guarantee you could find a rung that's like right there where you are. And so yeah, maybe this conversation gives people like an entry point, whatever that might be. And I also wonder, I'm guessing there are people who are closer to where we are as far as they have been practicing. They've been crying it out for years and like working through the stored repressed stuff. And so yeah, like how do you push the edges of your embodiment now, like on your leading edge?
Oof, such a good question too. For me right now, it's really, the normative lifestyle doesn't work for me. Waking up and like doing the 9 to 5 job and, the what's prescribed by society, what's prescribed by our culture, what's prescribed to us via the American dream, like that's not, I reached that mountain and realized that was not my dream at all.
There's no
Um,
there. What else? What's next?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think a lot of people feel that way. I think a lot of people are
totally.
increasingly realizing like, I think there's more to life than this.
Yeah.
So that's my leading edge right now is really what does it look like for me to build a day-to-day life experience that feeds me, that doesn't deplete me, that makes me
Yeah.
want to live and be human and participate in all of this, that brings me joy. And that allows me to serve from overflow. Like that was something that was really major to me in my career as a social worker. And I adjunct teach part-time, so I'm still involved with social workers now. But that's such a common experience and struggle in really any kind of human service job. And I think many other jobs are as well, is people end up serving more than they're receiving. So we end up, you can't pour from an empty cup. We've heard that saying before, probably, but people are doing that all the time. Like so much of human services, so much of the social work profession is designed in a way that people are serving from a place of chronic depletion. They're
Yeah.
burnt out. They can't meet the requirements of their job. They have too many clients. They can't really effectively help the clients because of these broader systemic issues that we have around us.
Mm.
I'm really seeking to reframe that into how can I create a work for me, a way of generating income so that I can survive in a capitalistic society that allows me to serve from overflow. So I don't have to deplete myself. And yet I still feel very passionate, as I always have, about how to help people in the midst of suffering and how to address systemic injustices that perpetuate human suffering. So I'm envisioning and I'm designing and I'm like literally living each and every day with this vision in mind of how do I create a life and a way of working that allows me to do what I love and am here to do, while I'm also loving and caring for myself and not pushing myself into a state of burnout again.
Right. Yeah. So what does that look like, or what have you found that's working for you on that front?
Mm. It's a lot of I feel like part of my travel experience, so after I launched out of my hometown, I did a variety of things. One of the things I did was lived in a van for about 6 months up and down the coast of California. And so during that time period, I was traveling. I was like with nature. I was still adjunct teaching on the side, but that's like such a small amount of a time commitment for me. And so I really had to unlearn being busy. I had to unlearn being busy and I had to learn how
Yeah.
to live in flow. So now I wake up and I have some like kind of structure to my day. Like in the morning, I try to avoid like my phone, social media, any kind of contact with the outside world and do different practices that help me be in my body and with myself. Listen to music and move. I like have a ritual where I prepare my breakfast and my coffee or whatever I'm drinking that day. I will usually always try to get outside and be in the sun a little bit. I'll journal, I'll do some different meditations, but it's like a time that's designated for me. So that way I'm starting every one of my days, I'm starting by pouring into myself.
Yes.
And then I'll start like thinking about like, okay, so what is the work that I have to do today? So I have like a YouTube channel, or I have this class I'm teaching, or I have these other visions and projects I'm working on. So I'll incorporate that in my time, but it's not scheduled. I'm in flow. So some days I'm like, I want to flow this way. And some days I'm like, I want to flow that way.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's something that works for everybody in their life. I think different people need different levels of structure, but I've learned that for myself, I just need open flow. And so I need to be able to feel like, do I want to respond to these emails today? Or do I want to edit this video today? Or do I want to film a new video today? But none of it's planned. And that's like totally different than anything in my prior life. I've
Which
also
I,
been,
okay,
oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. You go
I've
ahead.
also been really intentional about surrounding myself with community spaces and people and yeah, pockets of places that feed those parts of myself. Because that's the other thing that I notice in this reality when we're seeking to walk a different way. It can feel very isolating because suddenly we're going in a different direction than the rest of the collective. And there are people who have gone in that direction and are going in that direction too, and we'll find them, but it's not the same as when we were, in the herd mode with the collective. So it's been really important for me to counterbalance that by finding those community spaces and like really prioritizing making sure that I'm involving myself in different programs or tuning into people's YouTube channels that I resonate with or just
Yes.
getting those needs met. So I'm feeding myself the understanding that I'm not alone, and I'm feeding
Yes.
myself like validation of the life that I feel I'm here to live.
Yes. We're social animals,
Yeah.
like we're really not meant to do it by ourselves. So I love that you brought that in there because I think, for Aries North Node, It's like, oh, you're supposed to leave people behind and like do your own thing. And it's like kind of, but you're also supposed to be in community with other people who are operating from their own sovereign self, their own radical authenticity, you know? The other thing is like, I love what you're talking about with like kind of letting your impulse, your like creative impulse, like guide your day. That, like, yes, every morning I pour into myself, and that's kind of a consistent thing. But even that, it sounds like, looks a little bit different depending on like meeting yourself where you are that particular day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very unstructured, I mean, it's completely unstructured compared to the life that I lived before. And the life most of us live, which is really heavily, I mean, it's really heavily built around other people telling us to do things.
Well, when you're in partnership or collaboration, or you have a work environment, you have people counting on you for whatever responsibilities you have to offer to the group. Like, I mean, that I feel like is more the status quo of like you
Yeah.
grow up and you find your place within the tribe of like, what is it that you do? And then everybody else depends on you for that thing. And yeah, I think we can find a balance, everybody, Aries North Node, not Aries North Node, of like, what is it that you want to offer? And how do you do that in a way where, like you're saying, you're serving from the overflow? You're not designing your life around like, you know, I'm creating a deficit inside of myself every single day. I mean, I used to live in a very similar kind of way where so much of my self-worth was in needing to be needed. Like, I
Mm,
want to serve, I want to help people with their tasks, I want to answer their questions, I want to, be there for them. And if I'm home alone all day, I was like automatically depressed because nobody needs me today. And it's like,
mm,
I need me. My health and wellness depends on me. And am I valuable enough to like pour my own loving care into myself? Like
mm,
spending it on myself, is that worthwhile? And that was very much where I had to start in my own
mm,
like self-care journey. Was like solitude was not an option. That was like a straight one-way ticket to depression, to like be
mm,
off by myself. And all of it was because like my only value was in being of value to other people. And so I think like, especially for women, maybe for everybody, we get taught that. We get taught that like your needs are less important than other people's needs.
mm,
Like we don't wind up codependent by accident. People taught us that like, no, you need to do what I said. You need to behave. You need to obey. You need to, this is standard, like how children are raised. And so, yeah, I think anybody who's able to work their way out of that maze is incredible, in my opinion. So, anybody who is in any state of progress of working their way into like an authentic life,
mm,
kudos. And that brings me to a topic that I want to touch on for Aries North Node, which is courage. Courage is a very Aries keyword or archetype, a piece of that archetype. And I wonder, like, you know, what you're describing of like launching out of your hometown and living in your van for 6 months and like traveling all over the place. Like, what is your relationship with courage today? And what did it used to be? And kind of what's the in between been like for you?
mm. When you ask about courage, my mind goes to fear.
Sure. Well, I don't think you can have courage without fear, right? Sure.
Right, right. And I really noticed my relationship with fear change because I was a very, I mean, I'm a Taurus moon as well, so I'm like, I love a comfort zone. Like I was
Totally.
like I had like lived in my house in my hometown. I got that house when I was 20 and was like still there when I was like in my early 30s when I made this launch. I'd never envisioned leaving my hometown. I worked for the same university I went to college for.
Oh,
Like
wow.
I was in a comfort zone and I had a lot of fear about fear. Um, so it took a lot and it was deeply painful. It was the hardest thing I've ever done to leave everything behind in the way that I did. Um, And I think the only reason I was able to do that was because my relationship with the universe, I had developed it strongly enough at that point that I couldn't ignore the messages that I was getting. They were too blatant
Yeah.
for me to be like, no, I'll just stay in this comfort bubble. And plus, I think part of the change process is like, when does staying in the comfort zone, when does the discomfort of staying in the comfort zone outweigh the fear of the new thing? And so for me, the discomfort of being in the comfort zone had to get pretty high to the point where I was really stuck in depression. I was stuck in chronic anxiety. Like my mental health was not making the comfort zone a happy place to be.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was really
Yeah.
through that I was like forced to, I felt, I was voluntarily choosing this, but I also felt like I was on a soul level kind of forcing myself to make this big leap. And through that experience, it totally reconstructed my relationship with fear and therefore with courage, because I did everything I feared the most. Like everything I feared the most happened. Like I lost everything, and I don't wish those experiences onto people because it's deeply painful. And yet there's like so much power that comes from those experiences of really being forced to like go down into our depths where it's just us and like that's all we have left. And we don't have those like comfort item blanket people to turn to, in the same way that we used to. Um, and the power that it granted me is like knowing that I can do that and knowing that like nothing
Mm.
else, I mean I'm gonna like knock on something as I'm saying this, but like knowing that nothing else can ever possibly be like that again. Like I will never have to do that again because I changed so much through that process and I let go of so many of those old parts of myself through that process. Like change will continue to happen through the life cycle, but now I recognize that fear is an emotion, and emotions are messengers, but they're not necessarily sending us messages that we need to adhere to. There's
Yeah.
like concerns, right? So now when I feel fear about something, like I recognize it, but I don't let that make my decision. Because very often, like fear is a really compelling emotion to feel. And so historically, I would feel that and I would like block myself from doing the thing I feared. It was like too risky. This is dangerous. Nope. But fear is trying to keep me in my comfort zone because fear knows what my subconscious knows as safe, which is where I've been before. Fear
Yeah.
doesn't know what's on the other side of that door, but different parts of me know what's on the other side of that door. So I don't know, like people might be familiar with parts work, where you take these different like approaches to these like we have an inner child self and we have like an inner adult self, and we have these different inner parts that we can look at as parts of us and not the whole, because the whole is made up of all those different parts. Fear is just one part of us. Fear isn't the only thing that we're feeling. And so I feel like my relationship with courage now is like not ignoring the fear, because I don't think stifling emotions is ever helpful, but like recognizing that the fear is just one of many information points that is trying to help me make good decisions about my future. And I don't listen to the fear
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. Oh, that was really good. That was really juicy because it is so compelling, right? Like our amygdala is the whole reason we've survived this whole time. And like we're like top of the food chain, if you can go that far, of like this survival instinct of self-preservation and keeping ourselves safe. And like you said, like just shut off anything that's unknown or new territory or anything like that. And, I hear a lot, like, I love doing this work because I get to see the patterns of like, what do people go through when they try to live as their authentic self? And one of the fears is I'm going to lose people, I'm going to lose security, I'm going to lose things, jobs or whatever it is. Um, and I have to say, like, in radical honesty, that fear is not unfounded.
Yeah, it's not.
That's
Yeah.
that's a realistic thing to be afraid of, and it is incredibly likely that at least something in your life is going to fall apart because it was built on a foundation of your own playing a part. That like, I'm this person, this is my identity, I'm the server, I'm the helper, I'm the pleaser. And as soon as you're not willing to be those things anymore, that one-sided relationship or the job that's only working because you're willing to pour from your empty cup. Like, it makes sense that that's not going to go with you
Mhm.
into the other side, the life that is a match for your authentic self. So again, it kind of goes back to being willing to be with just me and me. Like, that I feel like is the most courageous thing we can do, is to say, like, I can never lose everything because I
Mhm.
can't lose me.
Mhm.
I'll be here. And if that's enough, there's nothing that you can't face. There's no risk too big that you can't take that risk, because like you'll always have your soul. You'll always have like your connection to the divine, or however you want to put it, your relationship to the universe. Um, and yeah, I think like courage and authenticity, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, they
Like
do.
if you can't develop that courageous part of you that's willing to take the action in the direction of the new territory, like authenticity is kind of always out of reach.
Right, right. Yeah, I think there's so many levels to this, and I'm glad that you made a couple points you just made too, because I also like I'm not advocating for people to just completely disregard fear, right? And like do the things and like don't think about consequences and like jump off the cliff without, any kind of preparation ahead of time. Like I'm speaking about a journey that took me many, many years of internal
Yes.
deconstruction first, and then developing that relationship with the universe, really, really visioning and feeling into like, is this the right choice? Is this the right path for me to follow? And consistently getting a yes.
Hmm.
So there's other, it's not just like, oh, I feel fear, so I'm going to do the opposite thing instead, because that can put us. And that capitalism is real, colonialism is real. Like the systems are designed to prevent us from living in the level of liberation that you and I are talking about right now. So there can be
Yes.
very real consequences to people taking leaps of faith. But I do feel like there is, again, when people are able to develop that relationship with the universe or the divine or God or whatever people want to call it, enough to be able to recognize that you're receiving, like being in relationship means that there's something coming and there's something flowing outwards. So I'm flowing outwards into the universe, and the universe is presenting me with things back. So when I'm at the place of being able to see, like, oh, here's what the universe is providing me. Here are messages, here are signs, here are resources, here's
Hmm.
the pathway. That's what told me, okay, go ahead and take that leap of faith, because I wasn't having to like figure out like, oh, here's specifically what I'm going to do. It was like the doors were just opening, and the universe was like, here's the pathway out of your environment right now. And you don't know
Yes.
what's on the road from that, but like here's the first few steps of the pathway.
Yes.
And so in that kind of a relationship, like that allows me to feel safe and as though I do have a safety net, because it's neat, like it's nature, it's the universe. Like I don't know, is there a bigger safety net than that? Again, when we can understand what's being offered to us.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you're saying here as far as like having a relationship to fear instead of like letting it have its hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Like, I want to hear what you have to say. And I have a story, I'll tell just like the abbreviated version, that I got so scared of something. I felt like I was going to be attacked by this person. And the thought that came, as far as like the fear was like alive in my body, the thought that came was like, to protect myself, I need a lawyer. And so the next morning, I start cold calling lawyers' offices like, hey, do you do this? Can you help me with this? And I end up getting on a phone call with a guy named Clayton, bless his soul. And he ended up giving me 30 free minutes that not only let me feel like he gave me all the information I needed to realize that my fears were pretty unfounded. And like, here's the pathway. Like you said, like he just kind of showed me that the door is already open and you can just walk right through it. Like, as long as this piece of paper doesn't exist, like you're free to go wherever you want to go. And him giving me those 30 free minutes was also why I started doing activation sessions the way I did in the first place. And so, if you think about it, activation sessions were born out of this like erupting fear inside of me that I was going to be attacked. And how am I going to protect myself? I need to find a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer. Well, I need one. And so I start finding one. Turns out I didn't have to pay anything. He gave me everything I needed without charging me. And so, like, fear, it could also be like kind of the oven timer,
Mm.
like the banana bread is ready, like your
Yeah.
answer is ready, and like the fear is so compelling that it gets you to act and do the thing that like you were kind of like, oh yeah, maybe someday I'll figure that out. And I was just like so on edge in my nervous system that like, no, tomorrow, first thing, I'm gonna make this phone call. And I did, and it just like liberated me. And so
Mm.
like that came from fear. And
Mm.
so, like, it's all about like how you're dancing with it. I loved
Yeah.
what you said of like when you're in a relationship, it's about what's flowing out and it's about what's flowing back in. And fear may seem like it is trying to keep us so small or confined or whatever. But I mean, in that case, it like sent me straight where I needed to go to like unlock me into my next level, but do it in a way that felt wise, like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is pulling back the specific situation that led me to like launch out of the 9 to 5 and realize like I'm not working for anybody else
Will you tell
ever.
us?
Yeah, well, I will tell you. Um,
I love the juicy, juicy details.
yeah, it was like a series. There were two things that happened simultaneously. One was I had just like done this big project for my job and I was like feeling really proud of it and I had done it like pretty much by myself and it was like the week after that I got an email from my boss asking for us to have a conversation because she felt like I wasn't doing enough. And I was in this place of like I can't give more than what I have given. Like the areas of that she wanted me to focus more on were just like not in alignment. And so that initially, like just receiving that message, initially I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
There was like a nope. And then simultaneously, I can't remember if it happened before or after, but it was right around the same time period. I had a friend who just in conversation, like casually dropped, I don't know if anybody's familiar with woofing, but woof stands for, oh, let's see if I can remember it, Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms or something. Yeah, I think that's what it is,
Oh,
Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. But it's woofing. There's a couple different programs that are out there that offer like work trade experiences for people who want to travel and who don't want to who want to travel and who are willing to exchange their energy in the form of labor in order to not have to pay to stay where they're traveling.
gotcha.
So I had been like, what? I had like had dreams about traveling. I knew that was like something that was pulling me. I was like dreaming every night about traveling and suddenly it was like those two pieces came together because that was my launch out. I found a work trade that just happened to be like in the right area, just happened to be looking, all the pieces just lined up. But it's those little things. It's like how because those to me were communications from the universe of like,
Yeah.
hey, you're going to close this chapter and you're going to open this one. So
Yeah.
those ingredients, I mean, that's the same of what I hear with your story with the lawyer, because it's when those ingredients come together, like we know something special is happening. We know that's like
Yes.
this is happening for a reason.
It's time.
It's
And
time.
I think there can be an urge of like beating up on myself, like, I should have called the lawyer 2 months ago, or like whatever it is. And it's like, but it comes when we're ready,
Yeah.
like, and that's what I hear in your story is like, you have to reach peak. I can't do this anymore. Like
Yep.
that's got to be part of it before the universe like opens the door. That to me is like the going all in, like commitment of like, enough, enough of this, no more of this. And it also brings me to another Aries keyword, which is anger. And I want
Mm,
to know like what's your relationship with anger like? And did that play a part when like you feel like you poured everything into this project and like you were so proud of yourself and then she's over there like, yeah, not enough. I'm gonna need more of A, B, and C. Like this isn't enough. Like, did you feel angry? Because I think I would have been.
yeah. I did
Yeah.
feel angry. I was like, what am I doing all this for? Because yeah,
Right.
she wasn't seeing the work that I was offering. She was just seeing the work that I wasn't, my energy was over here, not over here. Uh,
Right.
Yeah, anger is, I feel like I have learned how to utilize anger as fuel in those kinds of situations. Instead of it being something like explosive or reactive, like I didn't like argue with her. I just, when we had that meeting, I was like, okay, well, I'm submitting my notice and this will be my last few months
Totally.
here. So, um, but I do feel like anger plays an important role. I think anger is something that is suppressed, especially for people who, I'm actually non-binary, but I was socialized as female, of course, and especially for people who are socialized as female, we're not allowed to have anger. We're not supposed to show anger. People who are raised as boys are allowed to show anger, and like that's kind of the only emotion they're allowed to show. Um, but for us, I think I like kept my anger under the surface a lot, or it was one of those emotions that I would just kind of like push away, or it would come out of me in like passive aggression or, whatever, arguing or something like that. And I feel like as I have been walking the spiritual journey more consciously, it's been a reworking of that to use that anger as fuel. Again, because I'm a social worker and I'm really someone who's interested in systems and systemic injustice and institutional oppression. That's the class I teach social workers in. There's a lot to be angry about when we look at the outer world and we look at what's happening right now and we look at the ways that society has oppressed people for thousands and thousands of years now. There's a
Hmm.
lot of anger and I see sometimes that anger can keep people stuck. Like the anger, I mean, sort of like fear, right? When we're not in relationship with our emotional experience, it's like those emotions can kind of overtake us and end up like shutting us down because we're not sure how to work with the flow of that feeling. And so for me now, I intentionally allow myself to feel anger. I intentionally give myself when it rises in my body to like feel it through. There's like a fist squeezing activity that I was taught that you can just like, squeeze your fists really, really, really hard and like focus on sending all your anger there and time it for like 2 minutes. And
Mm.
there's other practices. You can push against the wall, you can like hit a pillow. There's ways to allow the expression of anger to get out of our body because that's what emotions need to come out of our body in some way, while then also being able to use that as fuel. So to use it as fuel, I feel into that when I'm designing content of like how can I teach people about institutional oppression in a way that's going to bring these systems down. Anger is a great fuel for that. You
Yeah.
know, I be strategic? How can I view myself as like a secret ninja almost who's like here to take down these systems and structures? And if you think the way that a ninja uses anger, like that's a very, it's very precise, it's intentional, it's not like, "Ah!"
Right.
It's directly to like right to the point. And so how can we like catalyze, and this is just a general question, but this is a question I'm grappling with is like, how can I catalyze that energy in the direction, in that kind of a focused, intentional, concentrated direction? Because that's where, like, we feel anger for a reason. It's like energy that wants to be expressed. So,
Hmm.
kind of align with it. Again, this is like, the Aries North Node at the top of my chart. Like,
Hmm.
my future vision is very much like in that energetic direction, or like fueled by that energy.
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful tool, and I would love to see, yeah, I would just love to see us be able to alchemize anger in that kind of an intentional way.
Yeah. That was so good. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I feel like anger is really underappreciated in our current society. And hopefully, this conversation even helped the listeners to value their own anger a little bit
Yeah.
differently and start to be a little bit more curious when it does come up, when we feel even frustrated, even irritated, even annoyed. Like these are anger's little brothers, like they're coming to tell you something about your boundaries, about who you are and what you want. And again, like you said, like we don't have to explode like the atom bomb and send shrapnel in every direction and be, hurting innocent bystanders. Like what I hear in yours is like, I want to target it like a laser beam straight
Exactly.
into what what is not working for me. And the reason I bring it up is because when I look at the turning points in me living as my authentic self, anger is present every single
Mm,
time. And it's like until I get mad, I have a really hard time like standing up for myself. It's like, oh, it's not great, but it's fine. Like it is that fuel to like make yourself bigger and be able to stand up for what you know is not what you want. Like
yeah.
there was one specifically where I had told somebody that like I'll do this for a year. And it had been 2.5 years. And I'm in it all this time. And in my mind, I'm thinking like it was only supposed to be a year. And it's like, and I mention it subtly every once in a while of like, yeah, sooner than later, I'd like to see this change and whatever. And then one day I walked in and I was just like, this is pissing me off. This is pissing me off. This is pissing me off. I left. I did like 18 pages of journaling. And the next day I was like, we need to have a conversation. And I
Yeah.
gave 30 days notice of like, this is changing right now because I
Yeah.
said so, not because like the collaboration is like giving me the green light. I'm giving me the green light. And anger was how I did that. So if I hadn't gotten mad, who the hell knows how long I would have just like stayed and stayed and stayed and stayed. So
Yeah.
as far as again, living as your most authentic self, anger is a piece of it. It lets you know like what, again, I think it's almost like the oven timer of like when you're able to like really get mad about something, it's time for it to shift. And there's
Yeah.
something that I love for Aries North Node that's like, as much as you want to be there for other people, as much as you want to support other people, nothing will help them more than you living in your own alignment.
Mm,
So, like, you getting mad and you, like, destroying a situation, like putting an end to something, putting a stop to this, breaking up with them, whatever it is, it may, in the short term, it may not look like that's great for them. In the bigger picture, it's exactly what they needed. You setting
yeah.
yourself free sets you both free. And
Yeah.
accepting that and like letting anger be the hero of the story, again, it's so counterculture, but maybe this conversation at least move that needle for a couple people, even just a little bit. I know it's like a working practice for me to like don't just automatically shove it back down. Like ask it like what is this? What would be better for you? Well, not having to put up with this would be better, like whatever it has to say, incorporate it proactively as much as you can. Otherwise, like there will come a time where you don't get to choose how
Right.
it gets channeled like a laser beam, like it'll be a bomb and it'll be hurting people a little bit more than you meant to. Been on both sides of it.
Oh gosh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's so wise and important. And you ended at exactly the point that I had wanted to add on to that too, which is like the difference between reactive anger and proactive anger.
Yes.
With reactive anger, I mean, this is when I think about systemic issues, like this is what I see us doing. We are in a lot of reactive anger. We're
Yeah.
pushing back against something that's like already pushed at us, and we're like in this like push pull, and we're like
Yeah.
fighting against, fighting against, fighting against. But it's always, I mean, that's when we're more likely to be explosive. That's also when we're less likely to be effective. Whereas if we can use our anger proactively to feel it and get information from it and not make our decisions from that place of anger necessarily, but to like take that into account. And, when we're in a calmer place to be able to like make that choice and have that determination to follow through with what our anger is informing us of. Like that's
Yes.
how we shift to be strategic in these decision-making processes too. This
Yes.
is how we get out of like that push-pull bull crap that we're like stuck in right now as a collective and into how do we strategize? What do I
Right.
really need here? How do I think outside of the box about different solutions so that I don't have to keep having this experience that I don't want to freaking have anymore? Like
Right.
that's how we can use our anger to be like really impactful in the world.
Yes. Like let it be the upvote of like whatever it is just became your top priority.
Yeah.
And wake up in the morning knowing that this is the most important thing. Like if it's able to make you angry, it's something worth pouring your life force energy into setting yourself free, setting other people free, like whatever the situation is. And I think, when we push it back down, we lull ourselves back to sleep. And then, like you were saying, like we just recreate the situation. And then we get a little more mad next time. And then we push it back down and we create it again and we get a little bit more mad. And eventually somebody gets hurt.
Mhm.
Us, other people, like, it's not a great cycle when we ignore any of our emotions. I love that emotions played such a central theme in this conversation. I love that. It goes along so well with where we started with like the mind body connection,
Right.
you know?
Right on down that track.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there was a thread. We followed it. So good. Amy, where can people find you if they want to tune in more to like what you got going on? Where should they look?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. I have social media spaces. My official YouTube channel name is Amy Catherine West with a C. But on social medias, I'm Amy Cat West.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll link a couple things in the description so that they're
perfect.
easy to find. Yes.
That's
Very
great.
good. Thank you so much. This was so awesome. I feel like we could probably dive back in and go a million more rounds on all the
Yeah, I
yummy
think so
things.
too.
Maybe we do that someday.
Yeah, I'd love to. This is very meaty and juicy, and I really
Oh,
enjoy having kinds of conversations. So
yeah.
definitely want to.
Well, in that regard, if anybody watching has any questions or any thoughts, any tangents that came up for you as we were talking about this, any tips for that mind-body connection, any tips for relating to fear and anger? I mean, we covered a lot of ground in this conversation, and anything that anybody else wants to add down in the comments, I would be super grateful, and possibly Amy and I can revisit that on a future conversation. Be great.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think I just want to leave with like a message to honor your emotions as sacred, like to
Yeah.
honor your emotions as sacred. Like anger is sacred, sadness is sacred, like it's all sacred. And when we can view our emotional experience as sacred, I think it puts us in a different place of how we react and respond to those feelings. And it
Mm.
allows us a little bit more space to like lean in and hear the messages that sacred rage or whatever, sacred grief want us to be able to hear because there's a lot of underlining rage and grief that has been built within, within our epigenetic DNA for the last thousands and thousands of years. And in order to evolve into a healthier humanity and, healthier culture, we have to be able to feel that stuff. We have to be able to feel that stuff. We have to do the work that wasn't done for all those thousands of years. So if we can like recognize that when we feel our emotions, it's not just something that's happening to us individually. It's a service, like it's a sacred service that we are offering to humanity to feel. So I don't know, like maybe that gives people some permission as well to like really, it's not selfish. It's not just about you. Like this is the service that you're doing for everybody when we allow ourselves to honor the sacredness of our emotional experience.